Good evening, everybody. Today we have with us Ambar Chandra, MM 2001. He'll be talking about a subject which is very near and dear to us. It's about oil-based economies. Over to you, Ambar Chandra.
Thanks, Nikhil. It's really a pleasure to be in the midst of so many AMers, and I really am quite surprised to see so many people interested in a dry subject like oil, which is I don't know how the interest level has built up, but I will try to keep the conversation as interesting as possible. And hopefully we get some insights together as a group and walk out better. So without much further ado, let me share the presentation which I have to take everybody through. Just give me a moment. Okay, we are set to go. Good evening, everybody. Since the Industrial Revolution, oil has been one of the most crucial commodities on earth. Without it, modern transportation, as we know, would not be possible. Industries such as aviation, aerospace, automobiles, shipping would look nothing like what they look today. When we will look back in history, March 2020 shall be remembered as a watershed moment in the history of oil and gas. The plunging demand of oil due to the coronavirus pandemic, combined with a savage price war for sustaining market share aspirations of key producers, has left the oil and gas industry shell-shocked. The industry, as we talk, is in a survival mode and possibly faces the gravest challenge in its history. Current trends clearly indicate that 2020 is stress test time for many oil-based economies and companies in the sector. So in the presentation today, I would like to share my views with regards to the COVID-19 shock to the crude prices and its impact to the consumer behavior, global oil politics, oil-based economies, and eventually the oil and gas industry in long term. So before we take a deep dive into the topic, let us take a look at as to what affects crude prices. Like in any economic market system, there is dynamics of supply and demand which is at play. So demand is primarily coming from all the different economies and countries across the globe. Each of these economies are at different stages of their development. So economic growth, geopolitical events in these economies has a direct impact on the demand of crude. Oil, which is traded in US dollar historically for a very long time that we know, is world's biggest traded commodity and has a very evolved futures market, and it's actually very intervened very closely with the global financial system. So any fluctuations in the financial markets or to US dollar has a direct correlation to how the crude prices move. Then there is this big play of inventory in the oil markets. As we know, many nations have strategic oil reserves, and market players like the oil companies use inventory to hedge the price fluctuations, to give them opportunities or to offset the risks. On the supply side, it's managed primarily by oil producing nations. So you may be familiar with OPEC, OPEC plus, non-OPEC. So these are the basically OPEC, big oil producing nations. So OPEC is what? OPEC is a cartel of 14 major oil producers. So they came together about 60 years ago. So they have been driving their GDP growth aspirations by managing the prices of oil globally. Well, they have a very structured agenda, and they have actually got a very defined mission for this associationship. But the bottom line of that mission, which comes out again and again, is steady income for themselves. Well, with a hold of about 75% of reserves and 55% of production globally on an annual basis, they play a very significant role in the setting of the crude prices. Over the last few decades, the key historical assumptions on which the oil industry has worked are as follows. So when we look at demand, the basic assumption is that demand is inelastic because there is a long lead time in altering the fuel consuming equipments like the automobiles or planes or ships. And the markets demand in the market does not shrink suddenly. However, all this basic premise with the advent of technologies like EV, which more and more people are talking about, clean technologies. Interestingly, the sudden global demand shrinkage due to the COVID has totally thrown this assumption out of the market. On a supply side, augmenting productive capacity has always been a challenge for this industry because it requires high capex to set up oil fields, to do the research and development work in setting up a oil field, and the uncertainties which go together with it. Then there are the geopolitical uncertainties in the places where oil is present. High capex requirement is there. So that's always been an assumption that productive capacities will take time, they'll take their own time. However, in the last 10 years, what we are seeing in this industry, there is a shale revolution which has happened in US and which has actually challenged this conventional assumption about this supply inelasticity in the oil and gas industry. When we look at the consumption and production, currently, US, China, India are the biggest consumers in the world, and the top 10 consumers account for about 60% of the global consumption. From a supply and demand balance perspective, there's been a delicate balance over the last 4 to 5 years with just minor inventory overhangs, if we look at it from current terms. And as of 2019, the total global production was about 100 million barrels per day, with Russia, Saudi, and USA being the top 3 producers. I'm sure some of you who do not follow the industry closely would be surprised to see US at the top of this list. Interestingly, US has boosted its production significantly since 2010, and as of early 2019, so this is a thing which I have put up, the figures after 2020 are assumptions of IEA. The idea of energy independence, which had always been a dream of American politicians across the political divide, has been made possible with the advent of shale oil in US since 2010. And it has unleashed a torrent of oil. And this is what has made US the largest producer of crude oil, and it has surpassed both Saudi Arabia and Russia. So, although OPEC still has the ability to drive the prices, US has limited the cartel's pricing power significantly. And with these production and market share increases, Mr. Trump mentioned in one of his speech sometime last year that his administration has not just achieved independence, but he will ensure that US achieves a position of energy dominance in the world as it becomes a net exporter. Well, looking at the current trends, that's what he said in 2019. So looking at the current trends, and the power play which is happening in the market, it seems that the comment definitely ruffled a few feathers across the globe. So let's see what happened. Year 2020 kicked off with an outlook of sluggish demand, with the crude prices hovering around $65 a barrel at the beginning of the year. The slide in the price of oil started with the outbreak of coronavirus in China. So in late January, when Chinese New Year break was extended and workplaces were getting shut down across China to contain the spread of virus there, the Chinese street got deserted and oil consumption fell quickly. The slowdown of this China economy meant consequences for the rest of the world. And that was the beginning of the oil slump in January and February beginning. So that led to a drop in the oil prices, which continued through February as the demand remained very low. So there was a significant softening of the demand during that period. So OPEC, to counter this, scheduled a meeting to agree on some cuts in production, because that's a tool which they always use to manage or bring sanity to the markets or a drop in price. So historically, what had happened in 2019, looking at the sluggish demand and the projections for the world, the members of OPEC had decided that they will make some cuts in 2020. So when they met again in March, members of OPEC proposed that they will make cuts to handle this supply shock, demand shock which the market is facing. So during that meeting, Saudi Arabia proposed the existing cuts throughout what they have planned last year will continue, and they proposed that the additional cut of 1.5 million barrels should be made to handle the current reduction in demand. So all the OPEC agreed, but now OPEC for the last since 2017 is an extended group. So they have got another 23 nations together with a major supplier, Russia, which has a much bigger production group they have. So OPEC agreed they will reduce. So, but the condition was that Russia should shoulder about 0.5 million barrels a day production cuts. So they put this to the representatives of Russia on 6th of March. Russia refused to accept the proposed cut in the shares, and that's where OPEC and especially Saudi got instigated. So Saudi retaliated by cutting oil prices by $6 to $8 per barrel and ramping up their production from the next day onwards. So what happened? If we look at the historical data pertaining to a single day drop in crude prices, then the drop on March 9th stands second to the drop which happened when US started Operation Desert Storm after Iraq invaded Kuwait. In fact, this drop is higher than the drop which happened in post 9/11. So this continued. So in March, as more and more countries went into a lockdown, the energy demand got dissipated throughout Russia, throughout the globe. However, Russia and Saudi continued to pump at will to boost their market share, which continued to batter the market. So the market keep on dropping. So this created chaos amongst the economies. So on April 9th, so US and G20 rallied together and they said, okay, we need to stabilize these battered market. So they got Russia and Saudi together and said, we need to settle these differences and you need to work together to initiate production cuts. So they got together, and some of you may have followed the tweets which Mr. Trump and some of the world leaders sent. So that initiative brought some sanity in the market. However, it did not last long. And the roller coaster ride in the market has continued. And it continued all the way till April 20 something, when the May futures contracts were up for up for renewals, and WTI went into negative history. The futures market went into negative for the first time in its history. And as we talk, the mayhem continues. There are talks of June futures being very close to negative. The oil prices are currently hovering around $25 a barrel in this week, and the markets are in a contango. Sometimes, in order to appreciate what is happening in the current, I think it is important to take a step back and look at history. So let's look back on what has happened. So let's tread a path back to the history of oil crashes. So I'll take you through to some of the oil crashes which we have seen in the last 30, 40 years. So I will talk of what happened in 1980. We'll talk of what happened in 1998, 2008, and 2014. So let's start with 1980. So the context is leading up to 1980s, so up through the 1970s, OPEC was a significant player, and they knew the price inelasticity of the demand, and they kept on increasing the price, and the price peaked, went all the way to about $35 a barrel in those days. If you look at it in current terms, it's about $109 per barrel if you adjust it to current inflation terms. In those times, the key consumers were US, Japan, and Europe. So these were the big countries which were consuming, big changes were happening. So when the oil prices went to their historical highs, other sources of energy became very viable for these countries. So they moved a lot of power generation to coal, nuclear energy, natural gas. And then around that time, there was significant improvement in the efficiencies of automobile also. So a combination of all this led to a shrinkage in oil demand between 1979 to 1981. So there was a shrinkage in the demand of the oil, and this shrinkage was a very significant shrinkage. There was a shrinkage of about 13% of the global oil demand in that time. So because of this shrinkage, the oil prices started softening. So from 80 to 1985, they kept on dropping. And in 86, they fell below $10 a barrel. So it took about 5 years for the prices, or 5-6 years for the prices to soften after that. So it fell to about $10 a barrel, which again is about $23 a barrel in current terms. So 109, if you want to compare with the current market, it dropped from $109 per barrel to about $23 a barrel. So during those times, Russia, US, and OPEC were the key producers. So what happened? If some of you have read history, there were very significant key geopolitical events which happened. Economically, there was Mexico debt crisis, okay? So when the oil prices softened, Saudi Arabia's economic preeminence was reduced in the world. USSR was a major producer before the glut, and they got squeezed out of the market during this period when the oil prices softened. And some analysts say that the fall of prices was one of the contributing factors of disintegration of USSR. The US oil production also became unviable, and the production reduced significantly, and Saudi and OPEC became major players during that market, during that period. So this continued for a period of next 10-15 years. Subsequently, they kept moving in the range of 25 to 35. There were some minor events, major global events, I would say in hindsight now, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, when there was a spike, and then when Saddam Hussein started trading moved his trading from US dollar to euro, we know what happened and how US reacted, and it's fresh in everybody's memory. So more or less, it was a very difficult time. It took about 15-17 years for the market to plow through that period, and markets and product prices were very soft all the while. In 1998, now we go to 1998, the oil price dropped from $24 to $12. So from Jan 1997, it dropped from 24 to $12.50, which is about 50%. And this is because of, I think many of us know about the Asian financial crisis. And coming from IIM, we know what Asian financial crisis did to this part of the world. There was an inventory buildup, and there was a shrinkage of demand locally. But what happened is all the local currencies were battered vis-a-vis US dollar, and this commodity being sold in US dollar, the cost became very high for these economies. So again, as usual, OPEC came in, they cut the production, and they brought the market back to sanity. Incidentally, it took only a couple of years this time round for OPEC to bring sanity in the market. But there are two things which are very interesting which happened during this period of 1998. One is related to the oil companies. So oil companies which were in the low income or not earning as much for the last 15, 70 years could not manage this shock properly during 1998. So it is around this time that the mega mergers happened. The Exxon and the Mobil came together. The Total, FINA, ELF came together. Shell, Texaco, Philip came together. BP, Amoco, Arco came together. So around the 98 crisis, this is when it all happened. So the oil market, again, as we move forward from 98, started moving forward. And it took some time for the demand to take place, because at that time, China's development was happening. And because oil industry was coming battered after a 17 years of low, post 1998, there was a lag in the investment of production capacities. So demand, as China grew post 1998 to 2000 ahead, demand started outstripping supply. So OPEC cashed on the cycle greedily, and it ramped up the prices. So the prices went up all the way in 2008 to about $144 a barrel. Again, because of the financial crisis, there was a major drop. The prices dropped in 1998, July 1998, from $144 to $34. It took about 5 months for the market to drop during this period. Yet again, OPEC took its traditional actions of cutting the production. So they, during the 2008 crisis, they cut production by about 16%, and they brought sanity and stability in the market. Within 2 years, they brought sanity in the market and put it back on its course. During the 2008 crisis, the global consumption did shrink by only 1%. I forgot to mention one more thing. During the 90s, so if you remember, I was talking about the 1980s crisis. During that time, the oil consumption shrank by about 10%. During 1998, it did not shrink incidentally, because it was a very localized economic problem. During 2008, it shrank by about 1%. So, and there was not much change, impact to the oil industry except for the pricing of the oil. Major impact was on the bank, the automobiles, and oil, E&P and the oil companies were spared from the bankruptcy. Interestingly, in 2008, when the markets crashed and OPEC was trying to bring sanity, there's something which happened within this group of oil producing countries, which has left a very bad impression, and of which we are seeing some trends now. Saudi Arabia had a very bad, unfavorable memory of 2008 crash, because it got played out by Russia and Iran. While Saudi was trying to reduce its production to ramp up the prices, Russia and Iran chose to keep pumping. and oil keep on moving up, and their market share keep on growing. So Saudi remembers these things, as we will see in a while. The 2014 crash is actually linked to the financial markets. So as we know that commodities are generally traded in US dollar. So there is a direct correlation between dollar and the oil price. So US Fed, as we have seen, has been using interest rate and quantitative easing as a tool to manage its economic crisis in the 21st century, like 9/11, .com, and other things. So while these rate cuts and QE limit the damage to the stock prices, it weakens their US dollar. So in 2013, when Fed, sorry. So in 2013, when Fed finally changed the course and started strengthening the US dollar, which sent the treasury yields higher, the commodity prices dropped, and oil being one of the biggest commodity, the price also dropped. Okay. But during this period, the other global producers reduced. So after 2014, what has happened post 2010, everybody tried to reduce the production as the market was dropping to ramp up the price. But incidentally, the shale revolution had come in US by then. So US continued to pump oil, and that's where they have gained a lot of market share. And now they are #1 producer in the world. So this is what the 4 major drops in history show us. So let's go back and see what is happening now and summarize our current position. So if we look at it, we are in the midst of current demand and supply shock with a major inventory overhang, which is quite similar to the oil glut in 1980s. And we are looking at a period of sustained depressed price again. Okay. Interestingly, it took 5 years for prices to drop. Okay. And it took in 1980s, it took 5 years for the price to drop and 17 years for the industry to come out. But the current demand shrinkage, which is similar, and the high inventory overhang, which we end up because of COVID, and with the market in this current form, we are possibly looking at a long drawn battle again. And to overcome the challenge, I don't think oil prices are coming out of this rut very easily. It will require a lot of intent and innovation, and which, mind you, oil industry is not good at innovation. And there is another thing which is happening as we talk. We as humans have experienced during COVID something which we always knew, but we had never experienced. And that the first-hand impact of oil and gas industry on climate change and our environment. I'm sure many of you see pictures of Beijing or New Delhi or a lot of polluted cities in the world to understand what I'm saying. Now all of a sudden we are seeing clear blue skies in a lot of cities. Therefore, I believe the biggest impact to the industry would come from change in consumer expectation due to this realization. COVID-19 is still raging around the world, but some of the contours of the economic futures are coming into view as we are moving towards a low-touch economy. There will be several industries and bankruptcies which will change our spending patterns. Definitely in short term, companies will try to minimize their headcounts and expenses. We are looking at further digital disruptions. Trade patterns will change as supply chains will shift. There will be rise of countries will try to be more protected about their markets. But in terms of consumer behavior, there are two things which will impact the oil industry in a big way. And that is the drop in transportation, which will happen due to the change in the way we live and the climate change realizations. And we are starting to seeing these trends. As a consequence of global lockdown measures, transportation, which contributes about 57% of the oil demand, has declined at an unprecedented scale in 2020. Road transport in regions of lockdowns have gone down by 50 to 75%. Jet fuel has been hit the highest in some markets. Even in Singapore, the drop is as much as 90%. Global electricity demand has dropped because of the lower industrial demands. China has still not gone back to pre-COVID demand, even though the infections had stopped earlier. In fact, situation in China can teach us a lot of what is happening, what is going to happen to the fuel demand in the coming months. What we understand currently, the congestion in the roads in major cities, although has soared during peak hours, but it remains depressed during off-peak hours. People are choosing to drive rather than take public transport. And there is significant reduction. China is still about 5 to 10% below what it used to consume before COVID times. As we see, and COVID has spread its impact across 187 countries, we anticipate, based on what the analysts are talking, we are looking at a demand shrinkage of about 9 to 10%. Now, with the new trends, people are talking about 12% shrinkage of demand in 2020. But this is based on the assumption that there won't be any multiple waves and countries would start to open in May and June. Well, in my opinion, the jury is still out because there's still a lot of unknown in front of us. So looking at the ongoing trends, crude prices are destined to remain soft and hover around the current level for a while. Based on history, such changes in energy market often precipitate big changes in geopolitics. For instance, the shift from coal to oil brought about a strategic significance in Middle Eastern countries in the 70s. The recent technology-driven boom of shale oil brought about significant growths and employment in US. A disruption of such magnitude will definitely leave an imprint on the geopolitical history of the world. So the key oil producing countries have to tread the path carefully and ensure that they don't end up on the losing side. So let's have a look on how this would impact some of the key oil producers and the net importers of oil. Saudi Arabia, okay. So as we know, for Saudi Arabia, oil industry accounts for 70% of their GDP. So as we talk, Saudi Arabia is looking at cutting its capital expenditures and using their sovereign fund, which incidentally is $500 billion, to sustain the employment of about 1 million people who are employed in the industry. Based on their actions, it's very clear that Saudi has learned from the past and is not willing to compromise its global market share in view of the impending downturn in demand this time round. They probably know that high reserves would be inconsequential in a market where demand is suppressed. Iraq is in a difficult situation because nearly 8% of the country's population is employed and 90% of their spending is coming from oil revenues. Whatever they needed for their essential services, healthcare, policing, education, everything practically comes from their oil revenues. So if the oil prices remain subdued and depressed, Iraq will see social unrest even after the pandemic ends. And so we are looking at a lot of turmoil in that part of the world. Russia has about 1 million people who are working in this oil and gas industry and 30% of their GDP. So when the pandemic started, some of the key markets, which are Europe and China, led to triggered a reduction in the demand, and it has already affected Russian economy. But Russia also remembers that the oil glut in 1980s eroded its geopolitical standing in the world, and it has a very good standing of sovereign funds, and they will use this to sustain market share to ensure that this history is not repeated. Then it brings us to the current, possibly the biggest player which we talked in the 2019, US. What shale revolution has done is to make oil and gas 8% of US GDP. So with job losses, news of job losses which have started coming in, bankruptcies in the shale industry, the oil in the well shut in news. So what news we had about the dream America had about energy independence, I think may be shattered. So based on what is happening currently, looking at the impact the industry has on the economy, the government is considering offering a stimulus to the embattled oil and gas producers in exchange for ownership. So we are looking, there are talks of partial nationalization indirectly in the industry as we talk. 110 million people employed is a big number in the current environment for US. So it is going to be quite tough for US. Historically, US has reacted to such situations by key geopolitical disruptions. However, over the last decade, it has lost its preeminence. So this event is a major speed breaker, in my opinion, for Mr. Trump in order to enable him to fulfill his commitment of making America great again. I'm sorry, I will put a caveat. I neither vote for Democrats or Republicans. In terms of oil importers, it's good time actually. A lot of countries like India, Japan, Philippines, South Korea, Australia, who are net importers, import a lot of oil. And they are spending a lot of money to manage the current crisis. So it will help them. So these countries are trying to boost up their strategic reserves and cushion their fiscal deficits as we talk. This whole impact of crude prices has actually taken the oil and gas companies, which are big organizations, rushing to ICUs as we talk. It has been a disastrous task for them, because the oil companies stand to lose more than 1 trillion in revenue in this year. The write-downs in inventory and the losses has been headline news. I'm sure you all have been reading about it. PetroChina recently reported 2.3 billion loss in first quarter. Shell, for the first time since 1945, had to cut its dividend. Interestingly, we are only looking at first quarter response. For first quarter, most of these countries were not affected. But just to share an insider's insight, from February, March, and April, we all have been in the oil industry have been scrambling to find storage because of the shrinkage in demand. There is a possibility that the second wave of shrinkage in demand, because of the overall events which are happening currently, will bring even further problems for the oil and gas industry. We are possibly looking at refinery closures at many of the refineries, because there is a limit to which a refinery production can be brought down. You have to, you can bring it to a limit, otherwise you have to reduce or close the refineries. So with the demand not picking up and the chances of second round of infections happening, there are gray clouds which are accumulating more and more above these oil companies. So we are looking at big impact to shale industry as well, as I mentioned earlier. So the shale investments are not viable at the current crude prices. And this is going to impact the companies involved in the US shale industry, and which will in turn have an impact on the financial markets and other players. And it will spiral into a lot of other things across the US economy, in my opinion. So as the situation unfolds, we in the oil companies are very shaken from within due to the reality of this impact. With a combined demand and supply shock, the viability of our historical upstream assets and investments, storage and efforts to keep the refined storage problems and efforts to keep the refinery running are some of the challenges which we are facing currently. In fact, based on what is happening currently and what is going to happen in the next 2 quarters, this year is going to be the worst year in the history of oil and gas companies. And this would definitely lead to a lot of government bailouts, interventions, and consolidations to keep the industry afloat. So in a post-COVID world, assuming we go out of it in a positive way, there's definitely going to be shrinkage in oil demand. Lower returns, there will be lower returns for oil industry over a sustained period. And this would bring about geopolitical uncertainties to the fore. With lower ROI outlooks, the industry would be very reticent to invest. Unlike in the past, the evolution in the EV technology this time round has the potential to pose a very serious threat to the industry, because the consumers have become more aware about the clean environment possibilities. So the ride for the oil sector is definitely going to be very bumpy and stressful. So I link it back to the topic we decided this with. If you read the ancient Celtic tales, they talk of cauldrons as a symbol of rebirth, abundance, and well-being. As per legends, when the dead and vanquished were thrown into the cauldrons, it would bring them to life. Well, we see whether the oil and gas industry, which finds itself in a COVID cauldron, will come out of it unscathed or not. Only time will tell. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambar, for a nice overview. And I just could see that tomorrow, coincidentally, we're going to talk about electric vehicles. One of our alumni is going to talk. So it's quite coincidental that it's going to fall in succession after your webinar today. Now, there's a question from Rohit. How easy or difficult it is to restart refinery extraction operations once demand picks up?
It's a very complex process. I just give you some thumb rules. Beyond, when you try to reduce production in refinery, you try to optimize. First attempt is to optimize the products which are coming out of refinery. So, I'll give you a very simple example. Now aviation demand has reduced. So the refinery will cut a lot of aviation production and move it to the cuts which are around it. But you can reduce it probably more up to 60%. But after that, definitely you have to close it down. And once you close it down, you have to go into a major shutdown schedule, and it will take a few quarters for it to ramp it up. So it's a very complicated process.
Next question is from Jinesh Shah. It's predominantly addressed to the Indian situation. Your view on ONGC and Oil India, Indian Oil.
with Indian government, I give you an overall view from because the way Indian government who puts its hand in this oil pie is sometimes very difficult to comprehend. Oil and ONGC, definitely the outlook is not good because their investments are high, and with the with the production prices coming down, return on investments will be low. What the government is trying to do in India, they have already increased one round of excise. They will increase some more, and they will use this money to ramp the product spending which they are having in the post-pandemic. So outlook for ONGC, I don't think is good. Oil India, I don't think is good because they are primarily in the same sector.
Question from Asawari Desai. How will it impact LNG demand and prices going forward?
LNG has been a big loser. Currently, there was a lot of good view about LNG, but the prices have crashed. And with the challenge to shale currently, LNG may face challenges because now LNG has its inherent challenges of transportation and storage. And with the oil prices slated to be quite low, move to LNG may be challenged.
I think this is your batchmate, Honza Cloek, Jean, MM1.
Yes, yeah.
He says, what is your prediction for oil price till the end of 2020? Goldman Sachs sees it about $50. And will the market still be in contango?
Well, it's a big forum to say what I'm saying, but I disagree with what Goldman Sachs is saying. I don't know whether I'll be able to face all of you at the end of the year, but my personal view is market will be in contango for a long time, for the next few quarters at least.
There's a question from Natarajan. There was some buzz about government of India should have imported oil at the reduced rates. Do you think it was feasible?
Saudi is still helping. So the oil moving into India, China is still at a discount. So it's a lot of oil is moving into India, China, and all these markets as we talk. So this will continue for a while. But there is limit to strategic storage, and the challenge which India is facing is there's a big demand shrinkage because of the lockdowns. And Indian strategic storage is not very high in comparison to what US and China and other places have. So there will be limits to what they can bring in.
There's a question from Venkat. Oil has been reducing for the past few years. Is there any correlation between COVID and oil prices? Is COVID situation only adding to the already existing oil price problems?
It's a very complex market, but yes, there will be definitely correlations in between commodities. How much it correlates, I don't think it's a very easy question to answer in a few lines.
There are three questions from Aditya Yellamati. The first question is, why did the WTI fluctuate more than Brent? What could have been the causes for it?
I think it's primarily speculation in the markets. And because of the unprecedented demand shrinkage. So it's like a passing of the parcel which was happening. People usually in the futures market, people roll over. But for a change, there was a situation when you really need to take delivery, and when you don't have storage and you have to take delivery, a lot of speculation came about. And that's why the market actually went into negative.
Have heard from many that oil is classified as sweet and sour. Could you elaborate the same?
It relates to the acidity. So how acidic the product is. So the products coming out of Saudi are very sour. North Sea are very less sour.
Why haven't other countries apart from USA move extensively into shale oil production?
I'm sure there will be countries which will move, would have moved, but because of the investments which were happening in the shale, and a lot of opportunities which came with those investments. US has always been fascinated actually with energy dominance if you look at the last 30, 40 years. So that brought about this revolution. Houston, a lot of Texas, all these were big oil producing regions in the 70s and pre-80 days. So shale revolution has come back with the new technology, fracking as they call it, during this period. I'm sure this will happen depending on the geographies, depending on the earth condition, availability. There are a lot of parameters which are required, but the technology has definitely improved a lot.
There's a question from Venkat again. Will OPEC countries allow oil prices to remain low as their economies depend on oil?
Well, I don't think MBS has an answer for that. Given a choice, all these OPEC countries will want the oil to be as high as possible, but the bickering which is happening between between Russia and Saudi currently, I don't know what is in store. I won't want to speculate on that aspect, but there's a lot of oil in the market currently.
Sanjeev Narona, you want to ask a question?
Well, I don't think I should be asking a question, but having traded oil at $10 a barrel and at $120 a barrel too. But I've left the industry about 10 years ago, so I leave it to Amber to to share his expertise on it. But I mean, if you're interested, I'm happy to share my views. But today's Amber's day, I'll leave it to the rest.
There's a question here. While production company will lose financially with low price, how would intermediaries fare besides lower demand in short term?
I missed the second part of what you said.
While production company will lose financially with low price, how would intermediaries fare besides lower demand in short term? About the intermediaries.
What do you mean by intermediaries? The customers, the consumers, or the industry supporting the oil and gas?
Yeah, Mr. Jay Singh, would you like to clarify?
Yeah, put me on.
Yeah, you're on. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I'm asking is how can the intermediary companies lose financially, not about the consumers?
With a 1 trillion shrinkage in revenue, everyone will end up losing at one point or the other. You cannot be lucky all the time when there is such a shrinkage in the industry.
But that's only from demand perspective, not from a margin perspective.
But with the supply being so high and the demand being so low, there will be shocks on either side.
Okay.
Any further questions? Yeah, there is a question here. Okay, from Manish Panchal. What are the reasons for steep prices post fall? Example 74, 75, 78, 79, 1.
Historically, if you look at the steep rise, they have been in the early 2000s. The steep rise happened because the production capacities had not built up, and China was growing, and then OPEC, as usual, was trying to limit the supply. So that's during the 2000 time. That's when the steep rise happened. Rest of the steep rises after the drop have more or less happened whenever this only tool which OPEC has, which is supply restriction, which they are trying actually in the current market context also. They try to restrict the supply and boost the market. So those are the two tools which are usually used by the market player to move the market up.
So are we expecting similar rise?
That's because of a demand shrinkage of 10 to 12% this year. unlikely you are looking at that kind of. In fact, my personal view is we are probably seeing the highest oil consumption that the world has seen. That's my personal view. It's nothing to do with my organization or anything. I think we have probably reached the top of the oil consumption for the world. There will be a downhill from now.
Your friend John is not leaving you. He has one more question. Next week is the expiration of June 20th futures contract. Do you expect next week similar volatility as happened last month? Prices to negative numbers.
I think I mentioned about it. There is a lot of speculation happening around it, but a lot is at stake for the US government actually, because it impacts them in a big way. I don't think the government or there will be, government will allow it to fall to that level. It won't fall to negative territories, but going into the week, there will be a lot of speculation because of shrinkage and no storage actually. So it's a big problem which these people are facing.
The question from Gaurav Batra: what will be the impact of the current global oil situation on India and Asia? Will they diversify even faster into non-fossil sources of energy?
Non-fossil, if you look at it, nuclear I don't think it is so easy to go into non-fossil. It may not happen. So it will still be a fossil fuel.
Yeah, Anish, you want to ask the question?
Yeah, I could ask the question. Hi, Ambar, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thank you, Anish.
Yeah, the world keeps talking about climate change and the need to move to clean energy. In transportation, I think the main idea is coming from electric, which major source is again carbon. So is there any investments going into any kind of new technology, or is it still the inside view is that carbon is going to be the energy source?
I mentioned in my presentation, when it comes to innovation and development, oil companies, because are definitely laggards. So you won't see a lot of development happening out of the carbon footprint, out of the oil companies. So I personally believe EV will create opportunities, but then for EV, you need to generate power. And then this industry will go in a big way to support that consumption. So currently, if you look at it, mobility is the primary driver for fossil fuel or this energy. What I foresee, this whole thing will move towards power generation.
But again, the source
will be
remain carbon.
Remain carbon. I don't see in near term anything changing. There was within the industry, there was a lot of potential and talk about LNG for the last few years, and but with crude prices dropping, LNG will not be talked as excitedly as it was being talked. So still, it will remain as easily.
Thank you very much, Ambar, for a very nice overview of the oil industry. And I hope all of us have benefited from this interaction. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome, welcome.
Welcome.
Tomorrow is the electric vehicles and renewable energy. So please join in, everybody. Thank you.